I never expected to open my eyes again, let alone see the world through both of them. My right eye, it could see again. I blinked against the sunlight, stunned, heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I had died. I remembered drowning. The bitter chill of the river, the weight of betrayal, the sound of laughter behind me as I slipped beneath the surface. And yet, here I was. Reborn. Lyra, a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned and saw him, Kieran. His face was so familiar, still too handsome for his own good. But now I knew better. His charm was a curtain, hiding what lay underneath: greed, selfishness, delusion. He was rambling on, pacing across the living room like he had rehearsed this speech in front of the mirror 100 times. Lyra, my company's just getting off the ground. Things are rough right now. I'm completely drained. I really need you to just stay home. Handle the housework. Support me. That's all I ask. Honestly, I feel bad seeing how hard you work. And besides, what woman wouldn't love to stay home and be pampered? I stared at him, my fingers twitching at my sides. He was dressing it up like a gift. But I wasn't stupid anymore. What he really wanted was a maid. A free one. One who could cook, clean, fetch, obey, and never ask questions. When I didn't reply, he scowled and tossed a stack of papers on the coffee table. Did you hear me, Lyra? I want you to go to the institute today and hand in your resignation. My heart, which had been soaring just moments ago with the realization that I had a second chance at life, crashed straight into the ground. I make 9,000 yuan a month, I said quietly. That's stable income. Respectable work. I'm the first graduate from my hometown to ever work at a national research institute, with assigned housing and benefits. You're asking me to throw that away, to become your housewife? Kieran's eyes flickered. He looked away for a second, but his voice stayed sharp. We're married, Lyra. Isn't it your duty to support me? Are you really going to argue over money? My company's new, we've only got funds to cover 6 months of wages. Once we make it big, I'll hire a full staff. Until then, I need you. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. So what you're really saying is, you want a maid, logistics manager, and unpaid intern, all rolled into one. He stiffened. What the hell, Lyra? I'm not mooching off you. The company will be ours, right? When it goes public, you'll be the boss's wife. People will admire you. Admiration. That word again. I used to think it meant something. Now? It was just decoration, shiny and hollow. Kieran, I said coldly. You live in my home. You eat food I bought. I didn't marry you so I could raise a failing entrepreneur while scrubbing toilets. You want a cheerleader? Hire one. His face twisted, and then he snapped, fine. Don't regret this. If you won't support me, we're done. Let's get divorced. He slammed the door behind him like that would be the final blow. I stared at the papers he'd thrown earlier. Divorce documents. Signed and ready. I had prepared them weeks ago. I smiled. Then I turned, packed my bag, and left. You see, Kieran wasn't always like this, at least not on the surface. He used to be the golden boy, heir to a business empire. But after his parents passed away and the empire crumbled under debt, he was left with nothing. That's how he ended up in a remote village, hiding from creditors, living off distant relatives, and that's where he met me. He was charming. Clever. Said he loved the quiet life, the old traditions. He dreamed of reviving the village's ancestral winemaking craft and bringing prosperity to everyone. I believed him. We got married. The villagers supported us. I even dipped into my savings to help him register his company, or Excellers. But passion wasn't profit. For 3 months, the company barely had any orders. His business account could only survive for half a year. He couldn't even afford to pay bonuses to the 3 employees he'd recruited. Then came the cost-saving measures. He called it strategy. But what he really did was fire the admin staff and ask me to help out. First just a little. Then more. Soon I was doing front desk, customer service, sweeping floors, managing orders, and fixing the coffee machine when it broke. On top of cooking and laundry. On top of being his wife. Like a damn spinning top. In my last life, I kept saying yes. Because I loved him. Because I thought we were building something together. That it was temporary. That my sacrifices would be worth it. And for a while, the company did stabilize. Orders came in. We expanded production. One day, Kieran told me to work on the bottling line to help with a big order. I obeyed, because of course I did. That's what I always did. That day changed everything. The machine malfunctioned. Bottles shattered. A shard of glass sliced across my right eye like a blade. I screamed and collapsed. The pain was blinding, literally. The technician responsible for maintaining the machine fell to his knees, sobbing. Kieran just waved it off. He said, "We'll deduct his bonus and cover the hospital bill. No need to ruin his life." When I asked about compensation for me, his own wife, he blinked. "You've still got one good eye, Lyra. You're not completely blind. And you'll always be beautiful to me." I should have left that day. But instead, I melted. I gave in. Again. The village praised me as the wife behind the man. So gentle. So noble. So selfless. Kieran basked in the praise like it was champagne. I kept pushing myself harder. Cleaning when staff called out. Babysitting employees' kids when they got sick. Staying up late to respond to customer emails because it would save us money. Meanwhile, he smiled for the cameras and posed with his wine bottles like he was already famous. For everyone else, he was the perfect husband. For me? He was a shadow, a stranger, colder every day. Eventually, I moved out. I returned to the Research Institute dorms. My colleague, Hannah, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me. "Wait, you left Kieran?" "Why?" I said it calmly, "He wants a divorce." Her eyes widened. "But, he's such a good man." I laughed bitterly. That was the image he'd sold. The truth? He was a man who wanted a woman to give up everything so he could have everything. I used to think love meant giving. But now I realize, it should never mean losing yourself. This time, I wasn't going to make the same mistake. The days after I left Kieran passed in a quiet storm of whispered rumors, sideways glances, and pity masked as politeness. Word of our separation spread like ink in water, fast and irreversible. At the Institute, people tried to pretend nothing had changed, but the questions always hung in the air like unspoken ghosts. Still, I held my head high. I was done shrinking myself for a man who only saw me as a tool, not a partner. I remember the first time I ran into him again. He was standing at the Institute gate, waiting, messy hair, designer shoes caked with dust, eyes flashing like he still thought the world owed him something. He spotted me, and that old arrogance flared back into his voice like muscle memory. "Lyra. You really have no heart, do you? After everything I gave you, you're just throwing our marriage away?" I stopped walking. I wanted to walk past him, but the anger in my chest burned too hot. "Didn't you say yourself that if I didn't quit my job and stay home, we'd get divorced? So what's your problem now? You got what you wanted." His face twisted, confusion laced with embarrassment. People around us had started to notice. Students, staff, villagers, everyone slowed to watch the spectacle. I didn't care. I wanted them to hear every word. "You said you wanted us to be united. That meant I had to abandon everything to become your satellite. What century do you think this is? 1950? Am I supposed to bow every morning and say, 'Yes, master, how high shall I jump today? I took a step forward. My voice rose, clear, deliberate. And don't lie to yourself. This was never about housework. You wanted me to quit because I made more money. Because my success made you feel small. And instead of becoming better, you wanted to shrink me. He turned red. Then white. Then pale green. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said, I'm exposing you. And you know what? I'm glad. Let everyone see what kind of man you really are. Someone in the crowd muttered, wow. Insecure much? Another added, what kind of husband makes his wife quit a national job just to stay home? His anger snapped like a breaking wire. Fine. You don't want to stay? Then I'll divorce you tomorrow. There are plenty of women who'd love to be in your place. You think you're irreplaceable? Without flinching, I looked him in the eye. I hope you mean it. I'll even hold the pen for you. That night, the village chief showed up at my mother's home, pipe in hand and authority heavy in his voice. Lyra, child, have you lost your mind? Kieran's working so hard for our village. Can't you be more understanding? My mother, who had been silent during so many storms in the past, finally snapped. And what about my daughter's happiness? Is that not worth anything? Or are we just here to serve the men around us like unpaid laborers? The chief bristled, puffed his chest like he was still 25 and in charge of something meaningful. Couples fight, that's normal. You old folks shouldn't interfere. I crossed my arms. Then why are you here interfering in our fight, chief? Kieran arrived moments later, strutting like a rooster in heat. If you apologize now, I'll forgive you, Lyra. I actually laughed. Oh no. Let's just end it here. You don't need to forgive me. You need to pack. His expression cracked. The self-importance drained out of him so fast, I almost pitied him. Almost. And then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years, I cried. In front of everyone. Loud and messy and real. Why am I the one being asked to give up everything? Why is my career disposable, my identity replaceable, my body a machine for cleaning, cooking, producing? I turned to my mom, clutched her trembling hand. You've worked yourself into a herniated disc trying to clean up after him, and he couldn't even pay for your surgery. Not a dime. Her face twisted in grief as the tears came freely. You're not doing this alone anymore, I whispered to her. From now on, you rest. I'll take care of you, Mom. That was when I heard it, a strong voice cutting through the crowd. This is a violation of labor rights. The state protects a woman's right to work. No one can take that away. Heads turned. A man stepped forward, tall and commanding, posture straight like a soldier's, voice calm but laced with power. It was Dr. Ronan Vale, the new director transferred to our institute, known for being strict but fair, and never one for village politics. He walked straight toward me. Lyra, don't worry. The institute knows your story. We're behind you. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder and then moved in front of me, shielding me from the crowd like a human shield of composure. This woman is one of our brightest researchers. No one has the right to force her out of her profession. Kieran stepped back instinctively. Even the chief went quiet, adjusting his collar in discomfort. And then came a voice I didn't expect. I can help with Kieran's business. I mean, I was just about to start my internship anyway. I turned. Sophie. The chief's granddaughter. Flushed cheeks, hopeful eyes, soft voice like a teenager meeting her idol. I don't mind helping out at his company, she added, sneaking a glance at Kieran. I've always admired his work ethic. The chief's face turned the color of boiled beets. Go home, Sophie. This is grown-up business. I'm not a kid anymore, she insisted. Someone in the crowd chuckled darkly. Well, that solves it. She can be Kieran's free assistant now. Win-win. And then I saw it, the smile creep back onto Kieran's face. Like the vulture had found a new carcass to chew on. He turned to me and said coldly, "Fine. We don't have to divorce. Not yet. I'll let this go, for now." I narrowed my eyes. "Let it go? You threw the divorce in my face like a dirty dishcloth. Don't spin it now that you're out of options." He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he thought it made him sound vulnerable. "I've sacrificed so much for this company, for our future. I'm doing this for you, Lyra. Why can't you see that?" I could barely hold back a bitter laugh. "You've done this for yourself. I've sacrificed everything for you, my job, my health, my time. You want me to give you more? Kieran, you're not a husband. You're a leech with a business plan." His fists clenched, rage burning in his eyes. "I thought you were kind. Thought you were patient." "No," I said, stepping into his space. "You thought I was weak." And that was the moment Ronan moved again, slightly closer, steady as stone. He didn't say a word, but his silent presence was louder than any speech. For the first time in our entire relationship, I saw something flicker in Kieran's eyes, fear. Not of Ronan. But of me. Of the version of me he no longer controlled. "Let's divorce," I said, the words like cold steel between us. "Otherwise, I might start telling everyone what you really are. And believe me, I've got stories." Kieran's jaw tensed. "Fine. Let's divorce. I'd love to see who'd want a woman like you. Already divorced, with a blind eye." Before I could react, Ronan's voice rang out, sharp and clear, "A pearl buried in the dirt doesn't stop being a pearl." Then he turned to me, his gaze warm and unwavering. "Congratulations, Lyra." And in that moment, I knew, my story was no longer about what I had lost. It was about everything I was about to gain. I didn't cry when the divorce was finalized. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel free either. What I felt was quiet. Like I was standing on a high mountain where everything below me was still moving, but I had somehow stepped out of the noise. Kieran moved out the same day the papers were signed. Packed his things like it was just another business trip. I didn't watch him leave, I simply closed the door behind him and sank to the floor in silence. Later, I heard he'd moved in with Sophie. That stung more than I expected it to. Not because I loved him anymore, but because of the sheer absurdity of it. Sophie, the girl who used to giggle nervously when she handed me tea at village meetings. Sophie, the one who used to call me Sister Lyra. I should have been angry. But what I felt most was pity. She had no idea what kind of man she'd invited into her life. After Kieran, I poured myself into research with a kind of fury that scared even me. I worked late, volunteered for extra experiments, skipped holidays. I was possessed, not by anger, but by a need to rebuild. Every minute I spent in the lab felt like stitching a piece of myself back together. Within 6 months, my proposal for an agricultural biotechnology program was approved as a national key research initiative. 2 million yuan in funding. A feature in a major journal. Private investors started circling. My name, once just a whisper behind Kieran's, now stood on its own, loud and clear. Meanwhile, the same project that I'd once worked on quietly in my old life, the one that was stolen from me when I gave it all up for Kieran, was now mine again. But this time, I wasn't the assistant. I was the architect. Ronan was there through it all. He never hovered, never intruded. But he was always present. Sometimes I'd glance up from a microscope at 2 a.m., and there he'd be, just outside the lab, reading a report, sipping coffee, waiting to drive me home. I didn't know when it started, this unspoken dance between us. But it was real. I could feel it every time he looked at me, not like I was broken, not like I was damaged goods, but like I was a flame he didn't want to extinguish. One rainy afternoon, as I was sorting through a fresh stack of data sheets, I heard a knock on my office door. Ronan stepped in, holding a cardboard box filled with hand-labeled files. I transferred to logistics, he said, setting the box on my desk. I'll be working closer to your department now. I blinked. What? Why would you? So I can be here, he said softly. To support you. I know what you're capable of, Lyra. You shouldn't waste your time doing anything other than what you were born to do. I didn't know what to say. For once, words failed me. Then he added, and also, because I like you. A lot. That confession didn't feel like a bomb. It felt like a sunrise, gentle, glowing, impossible to ignore. My heart didn't race. It settled. Finally. Still, I didn't say yes right away. I needed time. Time to be sure I wasn't just trading one man for another. Time to let the past rot fully, so it wouldn't haunt anything new I tried to build. And then, of course, as if summoned by fate's cruel sense of humor, Kieran showed up again. It was exactly 2 months after the divorce. I came home late, soaked from the rain, and found him standing outside my apartment, hair disheveled, collar wet, the smell of cheap cologne barely masking the sweat. Lyra, he said, smirking like he still had a place in my life. Let's try again. I'm giving you another chance. I almost laughed. You're giving me another chance? He looked confused. I just thought, maybe you realized how much we meant to each other. Sophie's driving me crazy. She's moody. She complains. She's not like you. You mean she doesn't serve you like a robot, I said calmly. She talks back. She gets tired. She's human. He took a step forward. You were always the better one. The smarter one. The kinder one. You should be grateful I'm even considering coming back. That was the final straw. Grateful? I stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. No. I was grateful when you signed the divorce. I regret not pushing for it sooner. I was about to shut the door when Ronan's voice called from behind me. Security, he said, walking up beside me. Escort this man off the property. Put him on the blacklist. If he comes near her again, he'll be reported for harassment. Kieran looked like he'd been slapped. He tried to argue, but the guards were already on their way. Before they arrived, I leaned in close and said the final word. You weren't just a mistake, Kieran. You were a warning. One I finally listened to. And then I closed the door. A week later, I heard the rumors. Kieran had married Sophie. Apparently, she had offered to help out with company paperwork late one night, and that help turned into a scandalous mistake caught on the company's security cameras. The village elders pressured Kieran to marry her out of honor, or perhaps to shut everyone up. At first, I thought, maybe Sophie's ending would be different. She had the village chief behind her. She had more support than I ever did. But fate, cruel as it was, decided she needed to learn the same lesson I had, just as painfully. Within 6 months, she was unrecognizable. Thin, exhausted, carrying the weight of Kieran's collapsing company on her shoulders. And then the worst happened. Another accident. Same production line. Same shattered bottles. Sophie lost her right eye. When I heard the news, it felt like a knife reopening an old scar. Déjà vu so vivid it made me sick. I sat down, remembering every minute of my own injury, the panic, the silence, the betrayal. And Kieran? He said the same thing he'd said to me. She's got another eye. She'll be fine. But Sophie's family wasn't like mine. Her grandmother marched into the village square and slapped Kieran so hard he fell to his knees. Pay for the surgery, she screamed. Pay for every damn thing you took from her. This time, there was no village praise. No noble image of Kieran the struggling entrepreneur. Just outrage. Disgust. And demands for compensation. 200,000 yuan. I watched the whole scene unfold from the back of the crowd, arms crossed, heart pounding. Kieran nodded, numb and wordless, like a marionette with cut strings. And that's when I knew, Kieran had never changed. He just found a new woman to drain. But this time, he would pay. With money. With shame. With everything. I turned to leave, and my knees buckled. Grief rose like a wave, crashing through me with the full weight of my former life. But before I could fall, a pair of arms caught me, strong, warm, steady. "Ronan. Rest," he whispered, holding me close. "You're not alone anymore." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The weeks that followed passed in a quiet rhythm. My mornings belonged to the lab, my evenings to the hum of soft music and Ronan's steady voice as he read from research reports or his favorite novels, sometimes aloud, sometimes just to fill the silence while I worked. He never demanded anything from me. Never once asked me to give up a part of myself. If anything, he shielded what little peace I had and nurtured it like it was something sacred. One day, he showed up at my door holding a steaming bowl of porridge in one hand and a gentle smile in the other. "No matter what you're working on, your health comes first," he said softly, bringing the spoon to my lips. I didn't mean to cry. But as that first spoonful passed my throat, something inside me cracked open. In my past life, Kieran never once stepped foot into the kitchen for me. Not even when I was bleeding. Not even when I was blind in one eye. I remembered him standing over me in the hospital, bored and irritated. "It's just one eye," he had said. "You're being dramatic. Get up. There's laundry to do." But Ronan waited at the lab entrance with an umbrella when it rained. He wrapped my scarf gently around my neck before I stepped out. When I had a late-night presentation, he reviewed the slides, then brewed ginger tea and waited until I finished. He never said it outright, but in every gesture, he whispered, "You matter. All of you matters." And slowly, I let him in. One rainy evening, after I had returned from a conference, he surprised me with a question. If you're ready, would you consider marriage again? With me?" The words caught in the air between us like a breath I didn't know I was holding. I stared at him, trying to summon all the pieces of my shattered past. But they no longer cut the way they used to. Somewhere between the pain and the rebuilding, I had found clarity. I nodded, once. And Ronan, who rarely smiled fully, broke into the widest grin I'd ever seen. We married in a quiet ceremony, just us, my mother, a few colleagues from the institute, and a simple promise, that I would never again disappear behind a man, and he would never let me fade. After the wedding, Ronan took over every chore in the house without ever being asked. He said it wasn't a sacrifice. It was a privilege. "You were born to do things that changed the world," he told me one night, as I scribbled ideas in my research journal. "The last thing you should ever worry about is laundry." A year later, I got pregnant. It felt surreal at first, this new life growing inside me. But also terrifying. Because I remembered what happened the last time. I remembered the baby I lost. It had been on this very day, in my past life. A stormy morning. I was 7 months pregnant when Kieran called me, frantic over some contract he had forgotten. "Bring it to me in 20 minutes, he barked. The office was across the city. It was pouring. The roads were flooded, and my belly ached with every step. But I went. Because back then, I still believed that saving Kieran's dream was somehow tied to saving my marriage. I delivered that document soaked to the bone, and he barely looked up. "You're bleeding," he said. "God, this is bad luck." Minutes later, I collapsed outside the building. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt, but the real wound came later, when the doctor told me the baby was gone. And Kieran? He didn't show up until I was being discharged. "You should have been more careful," he told me flatly. What kind of mother loses a child over a delivery run? Even now, the grief hit like a phantom. I would sometimes wake at night clutching my stomach, reaching for a heartbeat that never was. So this time, I was extra cautious. Ronan accompanied me to every checkup. He researched everything, diapers, prenatal yoga, safe food combinations. When I told him about the child I had lost, he didn't speak. He just held me, gently, until the tears ran dry. "This baby," he whispered, pressing his forehead to mine, "is our second chance." And then, one day, fate knocked again. We ran into Sophie at the hospital. She looked pale, frail, worn out in a way that screamed exhaustion down to the bones. She was alone. Seeing her was like staring into a cracked mirror. She was me, 2 years ago. The same vacant eyes. The same hollow smile. I was about to look away when something tugged inside me. A memory. A haunting one. That day from my previous life. I remembered being in that hospital, about to go in for a scan, when Kieran called. "Forget your checkup. Bring the contract. Now." And I had gone. And I had lost everything. The weight of it nearly crushed me. Without thinking, I turned and followed Sophie. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't even know if she'd talk to me. But when I reached the street corner outside, I heard it, a scream. I ran. She was on the ground, curled in a puddle, her hand gripping her stomach, face twisted in agony. The people around her stood frozen, unsure what to do. "Someone call an ambulance," I shouted, kneeling beside her. And then arms wrapped around me again. Ronan. He held me close, anchoring me in the storm. We got her to the hospital just in time. The baby was saved. I sat in the hallway, trembling, shaking, lost in 1,000 thoughts that weren't mine anymore. Was this how it would have looked, if someone had helped me? If someone had stopped me from running through the rain? If someone had said, "Your life matters too"? Sophie found me a few days later. She stood at the gate of the institute, her eyes red but clear. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." I shrugged. "You would have done the same." She hesitated. "No. I wouldn't have. I didn't understand until now. What it means to be discarded. What it means to be alone." "Kieran," he yelled at me. "Said I was ruining his business. That I brought bad luck." Her hands trembled. "He told me I should have kept walking. That grown women don't cry over stomach pain." And suddenly, I saw it again, the pattern repeating. The curse playing out like a broken record. He hadn't changed. He never would. Sophie began to cry. "Why did you leave him? Was it always like this?" I nodded. But I was too blind to see it. I thought it was love. Turns out, I was just convenient. She wiped her face. "And now?" "Now," I said firmly, "I live. For me. For my child. For the version of myself I buried for far too long." Ronan arrived a moment later, carrying my lunchbox, his shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes shining with quiet affection. I waved to him, and for a second, Sophie looked at us, really looked. And her tears fell again, not from sorrow, but something else. Maybe envy. Maybe regret. Maybe the first glimpse of strength forming inside her. Maybe her rebirth had already begun. After that day at the hospital, everything shifted. Something deep inside me that had been coiled like a spring, tight with grief, regret, and anger, finally unknotted. I stopped carrying the weight of my past on my back and started holding it in my hands instead. A lesson, not a burden. I was no longer a woman mourning a life stolen. I was a woman shaping a future of her own making. The pregnancy wasn't easy, but Ronan made it bearable. He learned to cook all my cravings, though I never figured out how he managed to make mango pickles with that much precision. He scheduled my vitamins, tracked every kick, and even bought a book titled How to Be a Legendary Dad that he read cover to cover, taking notes. When I laughed at him for it, he simply kissed my forehead and said, "If our child is going to inherit anything from me, it should be effort." I gave birth on a bright spring morning. It was painful, more than I expected, but when I held that tiny life in my arms for the first time, every second of agony evaporated. My baby, our daughter, opened her eyes and stared at me like she already knew me. Like she remembered I had waited a lifetime just to hold her. Ronan cried harder than I did. After that, he took a year-long parental leave from the institute and declared himself a full-time father. While I transitioned back into my research projects, he handled everything at home, from diapers to midnight lullabies to bouncing her gently on his shoulder while video calling the pediatrician over a minor rash. And never once did he complain. He never made it seem like babysitting his own daughter was a sacrifice. To him, it was the highest honor. "I already got the best woman in the world," he told one of his friends when they asked why he was doing women's work. "Why wouldn't I take care of her so she can change the world while I change diapers?" A few months later, the institute promoted me to deputy director. I was the youngest to ever hold the title. That night, Ronan cooked a full-course dinner, pulled out a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider, and raised a toast. To the woman who proved that resilience doesn't mean quiet suffering, it means relentless rising. I smiled through my tears. We were finally happy. Finally whole. But fate, like always, had one more twist waiting in the wings. It happened on our daughter's first birthday. We booked a small banquet hall at a local hotel, invited a few close friends and colleagues, and decorated it with stars and sunflowers, her favorite shape and her favorite flower. Everything was perfect. Until we stepped out of the car, and I saw them. Kieran. And his childhood sweetheart, Kala. Walking out of the same hotel, arms linked, faces flushed with laughter. They looked like the couple they had always dreamed of being, only now it was real. Or at least, real enough for the cameras they had hired to follow them around. Kala wore a designer dress, her heels clicking confidently on the stone pavement. Kieran was back in one of his expensive suits, the same kind he used to flaunt before his empire crumbled. And then chaos erupted. Sophie's parents, along with the village chief, burst into the scene like a storm. I hadn't even noticed them at first, but suddenly they were shouting, accusing, demanding. "You liar!" Sophie's mother screamed. "You married my daughter and ran off with her? How dare you?" The village chief wasn't far behind. "You embarrassed the entire village, Kieran. You humiliated Sophie." Kala tried to walk away, but someone shoved her. In the scuffle, she stumbled backward and slipped past the hotel's barrier, tumbling into the river that ran behind the building. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then screams filled the air. People ran. Ronan held our daughter tightly and pulled me to the side while the chaos continued. And then Kieran, trying to follow Kala, tripped. The riverbank was steep, the ground slick. He lost his footing and fell, hard. A car coming down the narrow side road couldn't stop in time. It struck him, dragging his body more than 2 meters across the pavement before slamming into a lamppost. The whole world stood still. When the ambulance arrived, they worked in silence. Everyone else stood frozen. And I just watched. My expression blank. My heart unmoved. Half a year later, I saw him again. Kieran. Once tall and smug, now shrunken in a wheelchair, right eye blind, both legs amputated. His skin was sallow, eyes dull, movements jerky. He looked like a ghost, no, worse. A puppet with its strings cut. A man who had drained the lives of others until he had none of his own left. He saw me. And smiled. "Lyra," he croaked, voice weak but desperate. "I had a dream. In another life, we loved each other. We had a child." I stared at him. And then, wordlessly, I pulled a bottle of mineral water from my bag and poured it over his head. "Wake up," I said coldly. "You didn't love me. You used me. You used all of us. And no woman, was born to be your puppet." His hands trembled. "But I always thought we." "You thought wrong," I said. "And now, you're alone." Just like you left me. Just like you abandoned me. He reached out, but his hands collapsed on the wheels of his chair. Trying to lift himself, he fell forward with a thud, sprawled across the pavement, helpless. I didn't help him. I didn't pity him. I turned my back and walked away, toward the sound of laughter, toward the voice calling my name. Director Vale. Ronan shouted, our daughter giggling in his arms. Over here. And that was all the proof I needed. This life, this life, was mine. And I was never going to shrink again. I didn't look back. Not when Kieran fell. Not when he groaned on the concrete, like some forgotten shell of a man who had finally tasted the consequences of his choices. I walked away with my head high, the sound of Ronan's voice and my daughter's laughter guiding me like a light out of that final shadow. That day, when I saw the man who once shattered me reduced to nothing but bones and regret, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't angry anymore. Not truly. Not the way I had been when I first woke up in this new life, fueled by the rage of betrayal and the bitterness of love abused. I had shed that skin like old snakeskin, piece by painful piece. What I felt now, looking at Kieran's broken body, was not triumph. It was relief. Because I had escaped. I had climbed out of the grave he had dug for me and built a garden on top of it. And that garden was blooming. Back at home, I held my daughter close that night as Ronan tucked us both under the covers. She was starting to mumble little words, soft syllables that didn't quite form sentences yet, but when she reached for me and said, "Mama," in that tiny voice, my chest caved in. I cried quietly into her hair, brushing her cheek with the back of my finger. This was the life I had begged the heavens for. And it had been given to me, reborn not as a punishment, but as a second chance. Ronan slid into bed beside us, wrapping an arm gently over my waist, careful not to disturb the baby nestled between us. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "He's gone. The version of him I feared. He's gone. And the version of you that feared him?" I turned toward him, eyes shining. "She's gone too." Ronan leaned in and kissed my forehead, then the tip of my nose. "Good. Because the woman in front of me now, she doesn't owe anyone anything." The next morning, I stood before the mirror and looked at myself differently. My right eye, once blinded in the past, now stared back at me strong and whole. My face wasn't just healed, it was determined. There were faint laugh lines now from the joy Ronan brought me, and my skin wasn't flawless, but I had never felt more beautiful. Because I no longer carried the weight of needing to be perfect for someone else's dream. Now, everything I did was for me. For my child. For the girl I once was, and the woman I had become. Soon after, I was invited to speak at an international science conference. My research on adaptive agricultural ecosystems was gaining traction beyond national borders. Companies I once dreamed of working for were now offering partnerships. The girl from the village who once scrubbed floors after finishing reports was now opening panels on sustainable development in front of world leaders. I walked into the conference hall, greeted by applause, my name on a banner above the stage. And among the crowd sat Ronan, quietly, proudly, holding our daughter in his lap as she played with the little stuffed star I'd given her that morning. In that moment, I remembered how in my past life, I had missed an almost identical opportunity. Back then, I had been selected to co-lead a regional development program, something I had worked for years to earn. But the moment I told Kieran, he frowned and said, "Will you even have time to cook if you're traveling that much? What about my company's invoices? Who'll manage them while you're gone?" I declined the role. I told the institute I had personal reasons. And I stayed. I stayed, and the position was given to a junior colleague. She rose to become regional director within a year. In this life, I stood at that podium and finally accepted what had always been mine. I spoke with confidence, with passion, with fire. I talked about resilience, not just in ecosystems but in people. In women. In second chances. I saw tears in the eyes of other researchers. Young women. Even the older men who had once underestimated me now listened in silence, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. When it was over, I walked off the stage and found Ronan waiting with a bouquet of yellow tulips and white jasmine, my favorites. "You soared," he whispered. I grinned. "Because you let me." He shook his head. "No, Lyra. Because you learned to let yourself." Not long after, I was asked to appear on a televised panel featuring women in science. They asked me to talk about my journey, what inspired me, what challenged me. At first, I hesitated. Talking about Kieran would be reopening old wounds. But then I realized, those wounds had already healed. The scars weren't ugly. They were proof that I had survived. So I told my story. Not the sanitized version. The real one. I told them how I gave up everything for a man who drained me dry. How I became a maid in my own home, working unpaid, unappreciated, unseen. I spoke about how I lost vision, both literally and metaphorically. How I thought love was sacrifice. How I watched my dreams slip through my fingers because someone else told me they weren't as important as his. I also told them about my rebirth. How I fought to reclaim my name. My job. My life. I told them about Ronan, the man who reminded me I wasn't a burden, but a force. Who never once tried to control me, only protect me. Who didn't fall in love with my obedience, but with my ambition. And I told them about my daughter. How when I look into her eyes, I see the woman I used to be, the girl I used to dream of becoming, and the hope of everything I'm still growing into. That episode aired across the country. Messages poured in. Women, hundreds of them, reached out to say, "That was me. That is me." And I replied to each one. "You're not alone. And it's not too late." Even Sophie sent a message. Just one line, "Thank you for walking first so the rest of us could follow." And that was it. I had gone from being the shadow behind a man, to the light other women looked toward. But I didn't do it for applause. I did it so no woman would ever again think she had to choose between her worth and her relationship. Between her dreams and someone else's comfort. I did it so my daughter would never ask, "Mama, why did you give everything up?" She'll grow up knowing her mother fought, fell, rose again, and kept rising. Because no man, no mistake, no betrayal could stop a woman who finally remembered who she was. The seasons passed gently after that. Spring melted into summer, then stretched into autumn. Our daughter took her first steps between Ronan's open arms and my laughing tears. She was growing, strong and stubborn, always trying to imitate me at the desk, scribbling on paper with crayons and declaring it was her research. I encouraged it. Ronan beamed every time she said she wanted to invent things like Mama. It was a quiet life, yet magnificent in its own way. Not loud with drama or filled with headlines, but with meaning. Every small detail felt sacred, the sound of Ronan humming while he cooked, the warmth of my mother's hand when she visited and held her granddaughter, the rustle of research notes at night while I worked under soft light. This was what I had dreamed of. Not luxury. Not fame. But a life that didn't hurt to wake up in. Still, sometimes the past would knock, not as pain, but as memory. One such moment came unexpectedly. It was a mild winter afternoon, the air just beginning to frost over. I was walking out of the institute, scarf wrapped around my neck, holding my daughter's hand while Ronan pushed the stroller beside us. We were heading to the local bakery. She had just discovered a love for butter croissants. And then, across the road, I saw him. Kieran. He was alone, of course. Sitting in his wheelchair, pushed by an unfamiliar attendant. His legs gone. His once sharp jawline now slack, cheeks hollow. The man who once demanded my world in exchange for his dreams now looked like he hadn't had one in years. His eyes locked onto mine. Recognition lit up slowly, like a dying bulb flickering once before burning out. He didn't call out to me. He didn't wave. He just stared. I held his gaze for a moment, not with hate, not with anger, but with something colder. Indifference. I turned back to my daughter, adjusted her little knit hat, and whispered, "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get your favorite croissant." She giggled and skipped ahead with Ronan. I didn't look back. That night, after she had fallen asleep and the house was quiet, I sat by the window and allowed myself to reflect, not on Kieran, but on the girl I had been. She had been so full of hope, of willingness to love. She gave everything she had to a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a ladder. She begged to be enough. Sacrificed her career. Her time. Even her body. And when she had nothing left, she was thrown away like a broken tool. But she had been reborn. Not just once. Every time she stood up after falling. Every time she chose herself over guilt. Every time she looked in the mirror and said, "I deserve more." I was proud of her. I was proud of me. Later, Ronan came and sat beside me, his hand warm on mine. He didn't say anything at first, he never rushed my silence. He just waited. That was what I loved most about him. He never tried to fix me. He simply stood beside me while I rebuilt myself. "I saw him today," I said softly. Ronan nodded. He didn't ask who. I didn't feel anything. "That's good," he murmured, brushing a kiss across my temple. "That means he no longer owns any space in your heart." I leaned my head on his shoulder. It's strange. I thought closure would feel like fire. A final explosion. But it doesn't. It feels like stillness. Because real healing, he whispered, is quiet. We sat there for a long time. Somewhere in the distance, snow began to fall. Soft flakes drifted past the window, glowing under the streetlights. The world felt clean, as if it too was starting over. Eventually, I published a memoir, not for fame, but because too many women had written to me, asking for more. Asking, how did you survive, how did you begin again? I titled it, The Cost of Silence. It became more than a book. It became a voice for those still too afraid to speak. It traveled from rural libraries to international women's conferences. It was read in secret by wives afraid to confront their husbands, by daughters afraid to disappoint their families, by young women on the verge of giving up their dreams for a man who promised them the world in exchange for their wings.